I'm very excited to start today's class 4 of the webinar, What Your ADHD Child Wishes You Knew and How You Can Help. Because today we're talking about ADHD in general. And what that means is we're going to talk about friendships and social issues. We're going to talk a little bit about technology, and then we're going to talk about some of the co-occurring conditions that can happen with ADHD. And oh my gosh, my computer magically changed, so now the screen looks familiar. Yay. So, everybody needs a friend. In fact, I suggest that everybody needs two friends so that if the first friend is unavailable and you're away from that person, or you're not in good terms with that person, you can move on to the second friend. So two friends are ideal. It's great to have more, but I really think that it's important that people have at least two friends. Now, friendship issues can agitate you as parents as much, if not more, than school issues. And the injustices that occur between kids with ADHD and their friends really can dig in and get you deep in your gut. I think that's because your own history with relationships combines with your natural protective parental instincts, and it just makes your blood boil. So I know that in your class handout, one of the first questions is, what were your friendships like as a child? And what aspects of your experience of friendships are you hoping your son or daughter will repeat or avoid? And I'd like you, if you're willing, to share, not necessarily about your own childhood, but what aspects of friendship you're hoping that your child could repeat or avoid. I'd really like to hear from you because that will let me know a little bit about what we're working towards in terms of ideal social relationships for kids. So, when we're putting the 5 C's into action about social issues and friendship, we're going to start with self control. You're going to notice when you're becoming distressed about your child's social behaviors and what the things seem to be triggering them. You're going to stay compassionate. In a calm moment, you're going to discuss the challenges that you see with them and pick one aspect of friendships or relationships that you'd like to see them change and discuss how you'd like them to improve. Then you're going to collaborate. Together, you're going to make a plan towards working on that one issue, and that includes practicing at home because social issues actually really can be helpful to be practiced at home with family, cousins, people who are like your family, who are in your close friendship circle. That's really helpful. Consistency. We're going to support your kids' efforts and redirect them as necessary. You're going to step in if a conflict arises with a peer and your child isn't skilled enough to manage it. And particularly for those of you with younger children, that's really important. And finally, celebration. You're going to acknowledge any accomplishments toward achieving that goal, toward achieving the friendship, or a successful play date, or a social endeavor like a birthday party where there were no big issues. And you're going to summarize verbally the progress that you and the behavior that your child was able to do that you're really feeling good about. And that helps in terms of really be having your child, hold on to something concrete that they were doing. So one of the things that you'd like your child to avoid, Winnie, is neediness for somebody's attention. It's kind of amazing how kids will kind of hook on to someone who sometimes is just not that interested in them, and they'll pursue that person because they seem cool, or they wear clothes that your child likes, or perhaps they're friends with someone that your child would like to be friends with. So I think it's really important to notice how your child might be compromising themselves by trying to get this person's attention. Now, in your sheet, in your handouts, the next question is, what bothers you about your child's social behavior, and what behaviors do you think they would say are problematic for them? Even more, what aspects of friendships and close personal relationships would they say are challenging for them or not satisfying them? I'd really like you to put some of these ideas up because I want to be able to answer your questions directly. What aspects of peer relationships or interpersonal relating do you know bother you about your child? Would you would like to see them do a better job of that? And what do you think they would say if I asked them, what would you like more of in terms of your friendships? I think that would be a really helpful thing for us to discuss. So please put your answers up there so we can talk about, children's social behaviors and where you're challenged in your family with that. So about so let's talk about some of the challenges kids with ADHD have socially. For some youngsters with ADHD, forming fulfilling relationships comes naturally. For others, it's harder. And either way, your child or teen is going to need your guidance to help them make good choices in terms of peers, manage sticky situations, and build confidence as they engage with the world. 1/3 of kids with ADHD has social anxiety, according to Dr. Thomas Brown. And some of their peer problems can be marked by less sharing, difficulty with cooperation, more anger, sometimes bullying, both as the offender and as the recipient, reduced guilt, and less empathy for others. Research has found that girls with ADHD developed fewer friendships and were more likely to be disliked than girls without it. And they're excluded, which is very painful. Boys can be left out of things because they can be increasingly aggressive, call too much attention to themselves, and not share peer concerns about fairness. So we have a couple comments about some of the challenges with friendships that your child might be living with. Doesn't know what to say with back and forth conversations. I've seen this many times, actually. Thanks for bringing that up. One of the challenges is that you have to actually practice that skill. And the best way to practice that skill is at home with cousins or what I call near family, really close family friends, where you can feel comfortable helping her figure out what to say, how to practice it. Um, and to practice that with you and her siblings and her father. Back and forth conversations take work. So if you have, for example, a cousin who's visiting, that would be a great time to help your child think about, well, what do I want to say that would be starting a conversation? How do I respond when someone answers? These are things you can talk about, but then you can live in real life. Um, your son is happy to be at home on the weekends without seeing friends, and you're wondering if he maybe is lonely or being excluded from former friends. That's a great question. A lot of kids with ADHD spend so much time at school working hard to keep it together, to engage appropriately. And when the weekend comes, they just want a break. They want a break from seeing people. They want a break from that sense of responsibility. Of engagement. Yet it's important, particularly for kids as they grow older, to learn how to interact with people in a situation or an environment that's not school, so they can relax with people, they can feel comfortable, figure out how to have fun. And so it is worthwhile pursuing how can you assist particularly a middle school or a teenager in getting out with other people without encroaching on their sort of burgeoning autonomy. And I think one of the best ways to do that is to invite a family over that has a friend or your child's age, so that you can have a low-key dinner. They can maybe play some ping pong or a video game, or you can all watch a movie. It's very chill, and so there's no pressure that a one-on-one social engagement would have, or a group where there's a lot of stimulation and it's hard to process what's going on. And that's something I'm going to talk about in a minute. uh, Eva says that her child doesn't know how to join a group of peers playing together. That can be really tough for kids. You see them already engaged in activity. You don't want to do the wrong thing. It's hard to know exactly what to say. And for all kids with ADHD, what helps them is rehearsal, practicing, having a phrase a phrase or two that they can say when they go up to a group. And I think that would be worth role playing at home, with you demonstrating something or them having a for instance. Make it fun, gamify it, and so that they would have one or two phrases in their back pocket that they can say when they approach a group at a lunch table, or they approach a group of kids who are starting a kickball game. And my son doesn't understand that some kids don't like to play as rough. This is hard for some boys with ADHD. And sometimes they think something's funny, and they can't, control themselves. And so they keep going, even though the other child may very well want them to stop and find it not only not funny, but offensive. And then children become annoyed with somebody who doesn't actually know when to stop. And again, I think that's something you could practice at home. Stop means stop. And what do you do with yourself when someone says stop? Where do you put your hands? What do you do with your mouth? Um, what what is the plan for these kinds of situations? And then when you're around your child, whether it's at home with a sibling, or if you're out on a playground and you see that they're not able to stop themselves, that's a great time to scoop them up, call them back and say, remember, this is one of those times. Stop means stop. What are you going to do? Here's what we talked about. An intervention like that would be helpful, and it would be direct at the time when your child needs it, so that they can then apply it at another time when maybe you're not around. It's useful to speak to teachers, particularly in elementary school, about these interventions or what those phrases are, so they can also help your son or daughter refer to those phrases on the playground or in the classroom when you're not there. Typical social excuse me, typical social challenges for kids with ADHD include all of the following: elevated levels of peer rejection and fewer close relationships, trouble making or sustaining friends. I've had a girl in my practice, and she was able to make friends, but then she became very intense, almost obsessed with them, and placed many demands for interaction and play dates, and wanted a particular kind of focused attention back from this friend. And she would just burn through kids in her class, which was very painful for her because she felt rejected and she didn't understand what she wasn't doing. What she was doing that was alienating people. Um, Many kids with ADHD tell me that they miss verbal, visual, or physical cues. And here's an example from Nona, age 10. Sometimes I don't hear exactly all the stuff people say. I really don't hear it. Then I get in trouble because I miss something. I'll blank out on what people are saying, like if they're talking for a long time, maybe a minute, I'll be like, yeah, yeah. And they're like, what? I didn't ask a yes or no question. I didn't even ask a question. And I forget things. This is painful for kids because they're in a situation, there's a lot of stimulation. There's auditory stimulation, there's visual stimulation, there's physical stimulation. It can be overwhelming, particularly for kids who have slower processing speed, and they don't know where to pay attention. They pay attention to one thing and they miss something else. And so we have to help kids figure out how to slow it down, and also how to get an ally. So I worked with a girl for a long time who had auditory processing issues. She was also dyslexic, and she had ADHD. And she would sit down at the lunch table in 7th grade, and there would be all of this activity around her. And she would miss things just like Nona. And she would say, "What? What? Can you say that again?" And her friends would say, "Oh my gosh, we're so tired of repeating everything for you. Why can't you get it the first time?" And she came into my office and she was really upset about this and cried a little. And we talked about was what could she do differently? And I asked her, do you have a friend? Is there a friend in your group who you trust enough to say, listen, I actually really don't hear things as well as other people. When I hear them, it takes me longer to process them. That's why I say what? Not because I don't understand, but because I can't catch it. Could you help me? Could you sit next to me at the lunch table so I can turn to you and say, what did they say? I missed it. Would you get upset with me or angry if we did that? And she was able to sit down with a friend and ask that favor. And what happened is that it didn't happen all the time. And eventually, actually, a couple of years out of when she was out of middle school into 9th grade, she was able to actually tell her friends, look, I don't hear things as well. But she wasn't able to do that in 7th grade. It was too uncomfortable. But she was able to say that. And then people said, oh, okay. And then when they go out to the pizza on a Friday night, it would be a lot of activity, and she'd say, what? I didn't hear that. And they'd say, oh, it's that thing with your hearing? And she'd say, yeah, I missed it. And they'd say, okay, I'll repeat it. Not all the time, but sometimes. Hold on, there's a question, so I want to take it. Does putting them on meds help with processing? What a good question. Research has shown that yes, putting them on an appropriate ADHD medication can help with processing speed. Processing speed is something that it's very difficult to teach. It's really biological, and so medication can improve by processing speed, and it helps people make connections more efficiently, and that can be very useful in social situations as well as at school or home. Another challenge for kids with ADHD is that they can be overly focused on other people, and that includes social activities, whether it's technology or social media. They may have trouble being alone, and this is particularly true in middle school. Ananda, age 14, says, my friends and my personal relationships are my life. Sometimes I don't even think about other things. Now, today with social media, and there's a lot of wonderful information out there, and I think I mentioned before, there's a documentary that was on CBS with Diane Sawyer called Screen Time, and of course CNN has a fabulous special that you can watch on YouTube called Being 13 that addresses issues of social media, of hanging out in social media, and FOMO, fear of missing out, and what that's like for kids, because a lot of life actually happens online, which may be hard for us as adults to not only understand but to accept and support. Many kids with ADHD feel the need to prove themselves. They don't feel equal to their peers. Actually, this week I had a client who is graduating college, and she told me that she looks around at her peers and they're all doing these wonderful things, and college seemed to be easier for them and not for her. And she judges herself, and so there's a way in which she really puts herself down, and because of that, she will self-sabotage, not turning in a piece of paper to make sure she gets her her minor on her diploma. That's what we dealt with this week, and actually, miraculously, we called together. She called in my office to the dean and said, if you'd get the paper into me by 5 p.m. today, you can have it on your diploma. And she got the paper in because she texted me with a thumbs up. So, that actually was a really interesting conversation. In what way did you feel like somehow not turning that paper in, which she was conscious of not doing, was actually sabotaging the idea of herself as someone who's just as good as other people. So the fact that she was able to turn that paper in was really a direct contradiction. And I spoke with her today, and she is so happy and so proud of herself. And it just required support from me and her making that phone call and taking the paper to where it needed to go. And finally, another common social challenge is expecting immediate responses from people. Kids with ADHD will say something, and then other people may think about it or say, not respond in the immediacy with which your son or daughter wants. And so then your son or daughter may think, well, what are you doing that I'm not included in? Is that pause because you don't want me? What did I do wrong? And they'll attach a negative message to the pause or silence. And so we have to teach them that actually people need to think before they act. Stop, think, act. That's just the second and third parts of that. So how are you going to help improve social skills and peer relationships for your children? What do you think your role is in your child's social world? I'd like to ask you to post some things. When should or shouldn't you intervene? This is a really important question. When is the time for you to actually jump in? And that's tricky. So I'd like to ask you, in your opinions, when do you think you should jump in? What has to be going on for you to jump in? Or what's not going on for you to jump in? Please write some answers so that we can talk about that. So one of the times that I think it's important for parents to jump in is to assist your kids in appropriate ways to help them make good friend choices. What is a good friend? Sometimes kids really aren't sure what that is, or they struggle with figuring it out. They need help determining what is the right social balance, and that requires a conversation. What is a friendship? What isn't a friendship? Who are people who are friends? When people are friends with you, how do they act? And when they're not friends, how do they act? Um, so you've jumped in and the friend stopped talking to your daughter. Wow, that's really intense. So I'm curious about that situation because sometimes, if you get too involved, people will back off. I'd like to think, I'd like to hear a little bit more about that situation, what happened. And Gina says, I think it's earlier than with neurotypical kids. Yes, you have to sort of be involved and watching what's going on earlier and for a little longer than it is with neurotypical kids. We talked about how kids with ADHD may struggle to understand the effects of their behavior on others, and so friends is a first place for that to be acted out. And oftentimes there'll be avoidance from neurotypical kids or other kids in the classroom um, rather than um, ha- rather than giving your child some feedback about what they could be doing differently. Mary, we have lots of conversations about this. Your daughter's extroverted, um, but doesn't see the social cues. I think it's a tendency for her to smother her friends, but also other friends take advantage of her. That reminds me of that client I was speaking about, how she, became so engaged with people, just so excited that she overwhelmed them. And so we have to really help them understand what are appropriate boundaries, what are realistic expectations. A friend is this. This is what is typical of what we expect in friend relationships. And at other times, people will take advantage of her because she won't know the difference. And that's sad. And I think in those situations, it's important for the adults at school and the adults in her life to help her to notice that when that's occurring and to help her understand um, when people are asking certain things of you, that's not okay. Um, I see. Your daughter, and we're calling boys at off hours and multiple times per day. The boy's mom called me, and you talked to the kid and their parents. Well, honestly, that seems pretty appropriate. And the fact that the girl didn't want to be friends with your daughter anymore speaks more about the girl and her family than your daughter. Because honestly, I hope that you live in a community where you are in, supporting each other in appropriate behavior towards other kids, but some parents aren't. And if you're doing that and you're the adult in the room, um, there may be some ramifications uh, for your kids, such as those friendships kind of peter out. And in the long run, I would bet that they weren't really good friends anyway. So what is the second way that you can intervene? You want to teach conversational skills and eye contact. So you want to work with teachers at school, particularly in elementary school, um, to facilitate um, to facilitate appropriate friends. So choose friends for people for projects with whom they could work, or there seems to be a budding friendship that could develop. And you want to help kids at home maintain eye contact with you. Teach them what is an appropriate way that you respond when someone's talking to you. And this means that you're going to teach these social skills with direct instruction. So you're going to listen and repeat what you hear. That's a part of a fundamental conversation. You're going to look and describe what you see. As a parent, you're going to see your child do something and notice it and give them that feedback. You're going to teach them how a body in space operates in your particular culture. So how close to stand to people. In my culture in the United States, we stand about 3 feet apart. It's very different in other cultures. I've traveled to China, and people stand very close to one another, and they consider that to be absolutely normal. This idea of sort of private space and a bubble is foreign to them. And you may need to show what 3 feet is with a tape measure. You're teaching a skill, a very concrete skill, and that includes what is the voice volume you use with people. There's an inside voice. Practice what that volume is. There's an outside voice. Practice what that volume is. There's a talking voice, and there's a getting upset voice and a yelling voice. Make sure you help your children identify all of those voices, because each voice engenders a different response from their friend or their peer. How you want to work with your kids on how touchy to be. Touchy emotionally, of course, that's a little harder, but physically, how do you keep your body parts to yourself? What do you do? When is the time to do that? And you want to work with them on negotiating skills and compromise. It's not my way or the highway, or your way or no way. It's our way. I'm going to give up a little something, you're going to give up a little something, and we're going to meet in the middle. That's compromise. And that's a skill kids actually have to learn. And you may need to intervene with younger kids to help them figure out that conversation and model it. And for older kids, you may need to just practice it in your relationship directly with them. I heard you say this. Did I get that right? Is there anything else? I'm saying this. What am I saying to you? Are there any more questions about the social lives of kids with ADHD? Because I'd like to move on to technology, which is a big subject. So if you have some more questions about situations that your son or daughter is in or dealing with socially, please ask them in the Q&A section or on the chat line. Technology and ADHD. Now, we talked some about this last week, so I'm just going to summarize some of the facts from the Pew Research Center study in 2015. At that point, the the center found that 66% of 8 to 18-year-olds have their own cell phones, up from 39% in 2004. 75% of kids have smartphones. Computers and televisions now exist in many kids' bedrooms, despite the fact that the American Academy of Pediatrics has emphatically stated that that's not a good idea. 71% of teens use more than one social networking site. Boys visit Facebook more than girls, 45 to 36%, and girls use Instagram more, 61% to 44% for boys, and Snapchat, 51 to 31%. Older teens, age 15 to 17, use Facebook more than younger ones. And that's because older teens are often part of activity groups, whether they're in the band or they play soccer. Those activities usually have Facebook pages. It's how coaches communicate, or when we know that when rehearsals are. And so being a member of Facebook is important. For younger teens, they tend to list Instagram as the thing they go to, the platform that they use the most. 25 to 25% of kids age 13 to 14. I think that actually might be a little low. But middle and upper income teens lean towards Instagram and Snapchat, which is unlike kids who come from households with incomes less than $50,000, and they tend to use Facebook the most, which is very interesting. So after we talked about technology last week, I'm curious, how have you attempted to create a balanced approach to technology in your family, and what are some challenges that you're facing? I'd love to hear about this. This is a major problem right now. Your 10-year-old fifth grade, most friends have phones, begging for a phone, but definitely a few years behind in maturity. I feel the FOMO because kids are communicating and she's being left out. You know, Gina, I've heard this before from many other fifth grade parents. And what I'm wondering is if there's a way to have a device where she can text but doesn't have the other apps. Fifth grade, I understand that she's kind of lagging in maturity, and so you'd be worried about what she'd be doing on her phone. I think that Apple has come out with a number of controls for phones. And of course, there always is, you know, a flip phone. They do exist. I can't really give you an answer because it's tough. I think that fifth grade can be young for a phone in terms of knowing what to do with it and how to use it. And I'm wondering if there's another way that she could communicate with people. You know, could she FaceTime on her iPad? What are the other options for her? Part of the challenge right now is that people are getting phones so young, and I don't think parents are really thinking through the consequences of kids having the access to a computer at all times, and what that's doing to their ability to actually develop real in-person social relationship skills. And those skills are super important for kids with ADHD, and they're for all skills. Excuse me, I'm sorry about that. Christine, every night I have to have my son leave the phone downstairs at night. Now he wakes up super early and I don't think he's getting enough sleep. So I've had actually clients who have this problem where the phone lives downstairs and kids wake themselves up early to go downstairs and get their phone. And so what that's telling me is that they are not ready to have that kind of access to their phone. And so I would suggest that you tell your son that the phone is going to live in your room in a locked box overnight, because he's not going to get it until 7 a.m. And regardless of what time he wakes up and what time he wakes you up, he's not going to get that phone. That's a new policy because teens need a lot of sleep, and most teens, their body clocks work so that they want to sleep from maybe midnight until 9 or 1 until 10. And so it's hard for kids who have to get up and get to school and be in their classroom by 8 or 8:30. So I really encourage you to figure out where the phone needs to live, that he can't have access to it until he's showing you that he's not waking up early just to get on his phone. So screen use can be habit forming and potentially addicting, although I don't tend to like the word addicting. I prefer dependency, and that usually happens with gaming. But you know, we have social media sites, we have texting, we have playing video games, we have sexting. There are a lot of risks with giving phones to kids before they're able to manage the independence and the maturity associated with using them, which is why actually being able just to text people for a couple years would be a step in the right direction. And I do believe that there are phones, in particularly where you can control it, so there are no apps except texting. Um, so that way kids could be in the game, but not running, but not run by the game of their phones. Screen use, there can be a lot of pressure to upgrade to newer and better equipment, and using it can lead to more time on the device, a desire for more time, and more time withdrawn from others in face-to-face. The goal is to have screen use be part of a healthy, balanced life. It's part of a diet. It's not the only food. Kids who are overly engaged with their screens can be prone to arguments, anxiety, and depression when technology isn't available to them. They will get tired. They don't know what to do with themselves. Um, During gaming, we discussed in the first class about dopamine and how kids with ADHD don't have the same levels of dopamine in their brains as neurotypical kids. Interestingly, when kids are gaming, dopamine is released during that activity, just like it is with drug use. So there's learning and pleasure that's associated with gaming in the dopamine pathways, and that's why it makes it so difficult to get off and to limit one's use. It's because I want more, it feels good. Let me just get through this and then I'll get to some of your questions. Cyberbullying is on the rise, especially for girls. Girls tend to be more peer-focused and are prone to forms of bullying, such as exclusion and rumors, without technology. So with technology, that's even more of a risk. And there was a big study in Boston several years ago of 16,000 high school kids, and it found that only 1/3 of kids who were cyberbullied reported their experiences to adults because they were afraid of adult overreaction or loss of technology. So let's think about this. There is a difference between gaming and using phones to de-stress, and gaming and staying on your phone as a distraction from any other troubling issues in your life, or as a way to apparently, calm your anxiety, but it actually just fosters more anxiety. So there are no established guidelines for diagnosing gaming addiction, but the World Health Organization has created this diagnosis for it. And when gaming is a coping mechanism or an avoidance for dealing with life outside of the computer, social challenges, school difficulties, family problems, health issues, when these things are flashing in neon lights that they are not being attended to, and your child is getting many negative messages and continues to use technology, then you have to seek outside help. And there are places now that treat, this very real dependency on gaming or obsession with technology. Um, Let's see. Christina, you're worried you didn't set rules early on. Now he's gaming far too much, especially on the weekends. Well, I think that that's a real challenge, and you can still set rules about gaming. It's never too late. Um, you own the technology. It's yours. You pay for the Comcast or, whatever you're using. And so I think it's worth saying, I'm noticing that you're spending a lot of time on your computer and not in other things that help create a balanced life. So we're going to limit this time, and then you're going to negotiate what that limitation looks like. I had one of these happen in my office this week where parents basically said, we want you to have an hour of screen time. Their son is in 8th grade. We want you to have an hour of screen time a day. So you get 30 minutes, and then if you get off and you can do all your other stuff, then you can have another 30 minutes. And he got very upset. And he said, I can't do anything in 30 minutes. I need more time. It takes me 20 minutes just to do like part one of some like this game. I need 45 minutes. And so parents thought about it and they said, fine, you can have 45 minutes. And if you get off without an argument and you do X, Y, and Z, you can have another 30 minutes on that device or on a different device. And he agreed to that. He agreed to that. And what was great about it was he realized that he basically then like shifted and said, I can do other things. I like other things. I don't just game all the time. So it was interesting. But I think you can do it, and I encourage you to do that because there will be pushback. But if you can engage him in doing something else, potentially with you, or have some people over who he likes, that might be helpful. It's not bad to use iPads as an incentive after they do homework. They want to do their iPads. Using screens as an incentive makes sense. It's when you give away the screens that's a problem. So when you create a healthy media diet, you want to do contracts and arrangements just like Winnie's suggesting, with privileges that are earned in terms of time and activities, access to certain apps or certain games that are earned with age and maturity. You want to make sure that you're friends with your kids on every social media outlet that they're using. You want to use easy on, easy off as a plan and use incentives for getting off. So for example, for this, as I said, the example about the boy in my office, the incentive of having an extra 30 minutes of screen when he had finished his chores and his homework was that he could have that 30 minutes. Initially, they said it had to be on a different device. He negotiated and they gave in. They relented. I didn't want to say they gave in, but they said, okay, you can have it on the same device. That doesn't actually really matter. What matters is that you get off without yelling. When you get off the second time, if you're not yelling, then you can have the option of repeating this whole thing the next day. If you have a yelling, then you're just going to get your 45 minutes. And he grumbled and he said, fine, then I won't even take my 45 minutes, blah, blah, blah. And I said, that's up to you. But that's the new policy. And good times to start new policies are things like the beginning of the summer, i.e. the end of school, birthdays, vacations. Spring vacation, we're going to start this new thing. Or it's Thanksgiving, we're going to try this. Or, now that you're 10, I think we should do it this way. And that makes sense because it's a new stage and kids can relate to that. You want to have them use technology initially at times that work for you when they're younger. So if you need to make dinner and they want to have some screen time, put those two things together. So they're occupied safely and you can make dinner. You want to understand Really, it's really important that you understand that social media is a form of connection for kids, a place where they can hang out, but they have to be mature enough to hang out and appropriate and be safe. Appropriate choices are key because when you're on social media, you can say something that you cannot see not see the effect of what you say. It's you can't take an emotional weather report, as Catherine Steiner Adair says, of the person on the other side. This means that you have to follow what I call the WWGS rule. What would grandma say? You want to teach your kids not to share anything on social media that they wouldn't want their teachers or grandparents or college admissions officers or coaches or future bosses to see. If you cannot say it to someone's face, you shouldn't say it via social media. This means that you're talking to them about what constitutes being a digital citizen. Just like you're a citizen in the world, you don't steal things, you don't hit people, you don't curse at people. You're teaching them about how to be a digital citizen. So make sure that you have privacy settings. And if you don't know what those are or how to do it, go to a place and ask them. Go to a computer store. Go online to commonsensemedia.org. Do a search. How do you set parental controls and what are good ones to set? Investigate before you give the technology. You want to teach your kids not to share personal information online. Don't friend strangers. And write these down and post it as a reminder for them where they'll see it when they go online. It's particularly important that you discuss the concept of a digital footprint with middle and high school students. Kids with ADHD have a now, not now brain. I'm doing it now, there's no later, right? There is a later because colleges and employers are searching online for people's profiles and what they're saying all the time. And so we have to help kids understand that when you say something online, even though it may disappear on Snapchat, somewhere it's not disappeared and it can come back to haunt them. Create a media contract in your family, which I highly encourage you to do. I would check out commonsensemedia.org. I really love that website. They have lots of suggestions and they're age appropriate, which is very important. If you have any more questions about technology in your family and how to do easy on, easy off, or how to set limits when you haven't set limits before, send me a message right now and I'll come back to this at the end when I finish talking about co-occurring conditions with ADHD. So here are the statistics. Kids with ADHD have other conditions often. And the ones I'm going to talk about today are anxiety, depression, and on what used to be Asperger's or autism spectrum disorders. So anxiety occurs 34% of the time with kids with ADHD. That's what the research shows. I actually think it's higher than that because that means that the person has a formal diagnosis and has seen someone for that diagnosis. But what I notice in my practice is that a lot of kids with ADHD have anxiety. And I'll come back and talk about why I think they do. Depression varies between 9 and 38%. And 30% of kids who have ASD also have been diagnosed with ADHD. Over 70% of kids with ADHD have another condition, and that would include learning disabilities. So let's talk for a few minutes about ASD. So kids with ASD struggle with problems with social interactions, communication, and they have what we call stereotyped or repetitive ritualistic behaviors. They lack intuitive understanding of several aspects of the social world. Now, kids with ADHD reach the markers of early social development. The kids with the kids who have ASD do not. They understand social dynamics, but they may miss the cues. They learn things like taking turns during play, using gestural language, responding to names. They know how to do imaginative play and to have appropriate facial expressions that communicate their emotional experience and use humor. When kids lack those traits, they indicate the very strong possibility of autism. Kids with ADHD may not be able to stick with turn-taking games, but they understand it. They may not respond when their name is called because of attentional challenges, but they're generally socially engaged and understand social dynamics. Kids who are on the spectrum struggle with those areas. When a child has both ADHD and ASD, research has found the importance of treating the ADHD with medication as a means to successfully improving the ASD symptoms. According to findings from researchers at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, these kids with ADHD and ASD, uh, have difficulty developing independence, and that they may need a longer lag time, a longer stretch of your support to develop independent living skills. Now, kids who are on the spectrum who do not meet the full criteria for ADHD but have a number of ADHD symptoms, this research project that I was speaking about actually suggests that they could also benefit from being treated for ADHD. So, so untreated anxiety. Untreated anxiety can lead to depression. And so that it's very important when you have an anxious child to start to really work with that anxiety. And the way that we're going to work with that anxiety is not through reassurance. Kids with ADHD are set off more easily and experience flooding more easily than their neurotypical peers. And this can be seen in panic or irrational worry. Kids with ADHD struggle with accessing and recalling things they know would help them in a given moment based on previous experiences, because that's part of what having ADHD is about. But being able to do that reduces anxiety. You can refer back to something you did and succeeded at, and you apply it to this situation. It may not be exactly the same, but it may be similar enough. Oh, I was able to 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 jump on the trampoline even though I was nervous about it. So maybe that means I could try jumping rope. And that's kind of a lame example, but I think you know what I'm trying to say. Many kids with ADHD live in a constant low-level state or sometimes overt levels of anxiety around making another mistake, letting someone else down, letting themselves down, not being liked. Remember, we've talked about that the positivity ratio. It needs to be 3 to 1. For a lot of kids with ADHD, it's not 3 to 1. And so their experience in the world is that they receive a lot of negative feedback, and that leads them to be more vigilant and watchful about what they're doing. Not that they can stop it, but they can see this happening, and then that raises their anxiety. Anxiety for kids with ADHD is often related to issues of performance. Am I going to do this right? Or am I going to mess up again? It can also be related to social issues. Am I going to be made fun of? Am I going to say the wrong thing? Now, depression, I found in kids with ADHD, is often related to shame and poor resilience. When kids with ADHD are depressed, they're disconnected from aspects of themselves that they actually like or feel proud of. They're living with hopelessness and helplessness and a persistent negative outlook. Many people with ADHD, in fact, to be honest, I haven't met one person who doesn't have a deep-seated sense of shame. Shame about who they are, shame about who they're not. And this shame about having ADHD and or being different than their peers eats at their capacity to develop confidence, to feel good about who they are. And shame can often start early in life and will continue into adulthood. And sometimes the shame is obvious, and other times it's more hidden and denied. But you can see that it's there because of the aggression that your child may be showing, the denial that they can be expressing about doing something that you know they clearly did. Um, Kids with ADHD expect to hear negative comments about themselves. I had a client who was, and we talked about this in my office, and, the mom said, I'd like to give you some feedback about, something. And the child said, I don't want to hear your feedback. And the mom said, well, it was good. There's no such thing as good feedback. It's all bad. So if you expect that what you're going to hear is negative and bad, you're going to have a harder time listening to, hearing, and really absorbing when someone actually says something good to you, which is why it's important um, to have that rule of three when you're telling your child they did something good. I'm looking at you, I'm telling you something, and I'd like you to repeat it back to me. It's easier for kids with ADHD sometimes not to try and fail than to try and fail. Because trying and failing just um, uh, strengthens that negative loop. Sometimes kids with ADHD get tired of trying. They're tired of trying so hard. And what they're experiencing actually is grit burnout. They just can't try anymore. And I understand that. I think it's hard to try and not be met with success, which is why when you're working on something, helping your child improve an area, we want it to be something that's just within their reach, that they're sometimes they're actually able to do, so that they can feel a sense of success. You don't want to start with something that's above what they're capable of, that you want them to work towards. Start with what they're showing you they can do sometimes, because you'll have a much better chance of actually integrating that and having them be able to do that over and over. Then you can go to the thing that you want them to reach towards. Shame, anxiety, and depression are deeply connected for kids with ADHD, and I think that's really important for you to know. One of the best things, though, about the ADHD brain, because it's a now or not now brain, is that kids are willing to wake up, even if yesterday had been a bad day at school, get dressed and go see their friends, get dressed and hope that today will be different. Not all the time, but sometimes. And when they're able to do that, you want to hold that so that you can say to them, remember when X happened and you'd had a really bad day at school, and the next day you were happy to go to school. What do you think is inside of you that you were able to be happy to go to school the next day? If they can answer, great. If they can't, you can say, well, what I see is someone who wakes up fresh, ready to try again. You can give them the language to help them do that. So if your child has any mental health issues and you feel comfortable sharing how you're approaching some of these, I encourage you to do so. If you want to share anonymously in the Q&A, you can absolutely do that. And if you don't want to share, that's fine too. Anne is asking, when do you give the extra time that they earn? Right away after the chore or homework you ask them to do, or can you wait and give it to them later in the day? I think that depends on your child. Some kids can tolerate waiting and some kids can't. If your child is not able to wait, then you could give it to them immediately, of course, but you might want to say, set a time. You've done this thing, now we're going to have dinner, and it's X time, you can have your reward. But a lot of kids with ADHD, they can't really wait. They need to have the reward after they've done the action. And that helps them because of that extrinsic motivation we talked about earlier in the webinar. They need that external carrot, that prize to get them motivated to get going. My son feels stupid and that he is not as smart as his siblings. He feels shame. This is heartbreaking. This is actually one of the reasons that I wanted to write my book, because I felt that these kids need to be able to hear from each other, and that parents really need to hear about the deep-seated sense of shame that kids with ADHD feel. I've been as patient and encouraging lately, but you're tired. Yes, parents who are parents with kids with ADHD are tired. You are like the little engine that could. You constantly are chugging along, pulling them along in and through life, making things better for them, helping them get through, organizing, teaching the steps. You're helping them with learning steps in procedural memory. You are their frontal lobes. It's exhausting. It is truly exhausting. And it's important that you know that you're not alone. That's part of the benefit of doing this webinar, that you can see that other people are struggling also. How do I treat him well when my cup is half empty? It's really, really a good question. Because your kids will sense that you're frustrated, and they'll sense that you may be feeling negative toward them, but you're not saying it. It's like this kind of invisible radar that they have. And so I think it's important when you're frustrated to name it, to name it and say, I love you. I am frustrated. I am not giving up on you, but I have to tell you, when I ask you 4 times to get out of bed and you don't get out of bed, it's really frustrating. I don't know what else to do. I want to treat you like the growing adult you're becoming, but your behavior isn't showing me that. So name it, stay calm, and let them know that you can feel frustrated and love them. You can feel frustrated and believe in them simultaneously, because kids aren't really able to do that. They tend to be, particularly kids with ADHD, tend to be black and white thinkers. It's this or this. As we age, and because we're adults, we can see the gray. We can hold those two polar opposites at the same time. And that's really important for our kids to know. So how can you help kids build self-confidence, feel a sense of worth, and reduce shame? First thing is to validate their feelings of being different. Their brain is different. But you know what? Everyone has a brain that's different. I have an anxious brain. You have an ADHD brain. I have a brain that really thinks something is funny and you don't think is funny. You know, I like to watch comedy shows on TV. You like to watch cartoons. People have different brains and different choices and tastes. That's what makes us each unique individuals. You want to acknowledge the frequency of negative feedback, social challenges, and stress that your child experiences. I want you to think about the idea that having ADHD is like is the condition of 1,000 little paper cuts. You don't lose your finger, but you have little slices, and you see that that's happening, and you're here on their team. Sometimes you can put Band-Aids on them. Sometimes you can just hold their hand and blow on the cuts. You want to nurture their interests and skills. It's really important that kids with ADHD have some area of life where they feel a sense of success other than gaming. Unless your child wants to become a game designer. Gaming is great, it's good, it's fine that they're good at it and they enjoy it, but there has to be something else. Sports, a hobby, maybe electronic music, something other than that gaming or screens that can make them feel like I'm a contributor. The boy I talked about earlier who wanted the 45 minutes and then the half hour, he loves basketball and he's good at it. And so that makes a big difference in his life. Like he plays basketball all year round. So he has something that he goes to a couple times a week where he feels good about himself. He's not always appropriate. He was a really sore loser when he was younger, but he's getting better. You want to help your kids nurture realistic expectations of themselves. They may have siblings with neurotypical brains. They may have friends with neurotypical brains, and they are comparing themselves to those people as if they should behave the way that the siblings or friends are. They are not able to do that right now because their brain is taking a little bit longer to mature. They will be able to do that in some way later. So let's try to build an island of competency, something that they feel good at. So maybe they're not as good at school as their sister was, but you know what? They're actually really good at mowing the lawn. Far out. Can we make some money doing that? What do you want to do with your money? That kind of a thing. Now, it's really important, and this is going to sound a little crazy for you, probably, but you want to try to avoid reassurance when kids are anxious and afraid. It's natural to reassure younger kids, you know, and that's okay. But as kids age, when you reassure them, you give them a short-term decrease in their anxiety or what their fear of something, but you're not teaching them skills to manage this anxiety. So ultimately there's a long-term increase in the anxiety or the fear or the lower self-esteem. Your child begins to use you as someone to lean on, to build them up, and they're not capable of doing that for themselves. They have to learn how to intentionally talk to themselves in ways that helps them move forward bravely, in spite of the worry or the concern that they have. So you want to help predict a worry about a situation and learn how to talk back to it. You want to help them see how they've overcome something in the past and apply that to their present situation. Worry, fear, low self-esteem, say blah, 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 and you can't handle it, and you're not going to succeed. You want to help them have some phrases to counteract that they actually can believe. Anxiety in particular is an overestimation of a problem and an underestimation of the resources that you think you have to deal with it. When you avoid something, it just gets bigger. But if you go toward your fear, it gets weaker and you get bigger. You become empowered because you're taking it on. This helps you foster a growth mindset. And growth mindsets foster resilience because you're learning to comfort, because you're learning to tolerate discomfort and the uncertainty of not knowing and possibly risk being disappointed and do it anyway. You're going to do that because you are comfortable and confident that if you're disappointed, you will know how to soothe yourself. You will learn how to make other choices. If we are constantly the soothing mechanism, your child won't learn what to say to themselves. We are there for them early on. We teach them things to say, and eventually they can do that more often than not. Of course, we all lean on our parents and our friends. I'm not saying you shouldn't. And sometimes people really do need reassurance. There have been many times where I'll say to my husband, I don't know if I can do this. I think I need a little reassurance here. That's different. What I'm talking about is blatantly tolerating avoidant activities and behaviors in your kids because they don't want to take a chance and try something, because they're afraid of failure or they're afraid it won't work out. That does not teach resilience. That teaches low self-esteem. Resilient people bounce back when problems arise. They don't blame others or themselves. They ask, what could I do differently? And what you can do is to say to your child, we're going to take a risk here and see how it goes. I'm here to assist you. I'm here if something goes wrong. And eventually, you'll be there for yourself because I've modeled for you how to do that. Remember that the best players in baseball have a batting average that means they fail at the plate 2 out of 3 times. The best players. So if the best players in baseball fail at the plate 2 out of 3 times, maybe we could try. It's hard to tolerate our children's disappointment. It's hard to see our kids sad and upset. And sometimes we will step in. That's fine. But it's the sometimes rule. It's not the always rule. So we're going to go a few minutes later today. I want to make sure people have time for questions. I had a lot to talk about, and we started a few minutes late as well because I had some computer issues. So we've talked about friendships. We've talked about technology. We've talked about anxiety, depression, low self-esteem, autism spectrum disorders. And throughout the class, we've talked about school and home challenges and just the facts about living with ADHD. I'd like to give you some time right now, please, to ask any questions that you wish I would answer. This is your chance. So I really want to encourage you to take a minute and think about your questions and type some in. I see that we're all here, and there's been a lot of information today. So I'm curious, how many of you feel like you are reassuring your kids more than you'd like, and how many of you are struggling with seeing your child struggle themselves? Should I push my child with ADHD as much as his siblings, chores, schoolwork, jobs, testing to be the same expectations? I think actually the question isn't if they're the same expectations, it's the degree of the expectations. So yes, your child should have similar expectations. You go to school, you work, blah, blah, blah. The question is how much and how often. So you go to school every day, of course, but maybe your child is a child who can't go to school every day. I've had some of these kids in my practice, and we basically made an agreement that there was a period of time for which they couldn't go to school every day of the week, and they had enough absences left, and so they took a half day sometimes. And we set a day. It was Wednesday. Wednesday, you were done at 12, just to give yourself a break. And that helped them know that they were going to be able to get through their week. But I do think that having, not excusing your kids from doing things that you would not excuse their siblings from actually teaches them to avoid and not how to do things. Can one grow out of ADHD? Yes, about a third of kids can grow out of it, but I'm not sure. You've been really working on reassuring more. You think you're protecting him and the siblings resent it. Yes, that's exactly what happened. And we didn't actually get to spend a lot of time on siblings of kids with ADHD who don't have ADHD, but often they do feel like that there's unfair treatment in the family. And so what I would encourage you to do is that to have your son or daughter have chores, but maybe not have as many chores because they perhaps can't do as many chores appropriately. Maybe they have the chores and you must lay out, of course, the steps for them. But instead of having, 3 chores that their siblings have, maybe they have 2 because that's what they do. Um, Maybe they're good at some chores and better at some chores and not at others. So have them do the things they're good at and have the other siblings do the things that they're not so good at. That way they'll have some success. Can kids grow out of ADHD? So my opinion is, it's really about what the statistics show, not my opinion. I'm not sure I think it's about 10% of kids with ADHD outgrow it, but I can look that up, Margaret, and get back to you. Um, uh, how do you help parents and kids and families with ADHD to really support and help each other? That's such a good question. I think one of the things that helps is transparency. So that, like I'd suggested before, that if you're frustrated, you say, I love you and I'm frustrated. Um, that, that you teach your child how to use their words rather than act out their feelings. And I guess it would be worth having a conversation, really worth having a conversation. What does support look like in our family? What does kindness look like in our family? And to have some specific things, because general kindness, yeah, we're nice to each other, we don't yell at each other, that's not going to happen. But one of the ways we show kindness is we don't hit. So we don't hit in our family. One of the ways that we give support is if you're feeling like you've had a bad day and you want a hug, you ask for a hug, you get a hug, that kind of a thing. Medication, negative long-term issues. I think that these are really good questions to speak to your pediatrician about, since I'm not a medical doctor. I think that in the long run, the side effects have been found to be very small. They change for different kids. Sometimes you may have trouble with some appetite suppressant on one medication, or sometimes a medication may no longer work and you need something else. But I really think it's important to direct these questions to your prescriber or your pediatrician. How do you support each other when you both have ADHD? Thank you for clarifying. So I think what it would be great is to pick an issue that everyone needs to work on and have a family intervention. We all could be a little bit neater. So every night before we go to bed, we're going to do a clean sweep, and you're going to pick up we're going to pick up your clothes, your shoes, and your socks that are around the house and put them here. Every night we're going to pack your backpack, and I'm going to pack my bag for work so it's ready in the morning so we have less stress. Pick something that you'd like to work on yourself. Lay out a few of those. Ask your kids what they'd like to work on, and then see if any of them overlap. They very well might, and that you could work on them together. You could also do parallel experience where your child is working on one thing and you're working on another, and you of course know what each of you is working on, so you can support each other. Oh, Mom, it's okay you did that thing again. I know because I did this thing again. Do I think that private special education schools are better than public elementary schools for kids with ADHD? I think that's a pretty general question, and I don't actually have an opinion about that because I think it depends on your child and what sorts of services your school district is able to offer. I think when school districts can actually offer the tools and support that kids with ADHD need, that's fantastic. Some kids need to be in a setting where they don't feel singled out for having ADHD, and they can get the support they need in an environment where they're just like everyone else, and that actually helps them. And particularly for kids who have ADHD and severe learning disabilities, it can be helpful to be in a school with kids who are also struggling in more than one area and feel okay about themselves. I think you can absolutely expect bright futures for your kids. Truthfully, honestly, I've been doing this long enough that I can tell you that development is in your child's best interest. As your child grows physiologically and their brain develops and connects with the rest of their brain, and they start to actually be able to remember things, to modulate their emotions, to think about the future, to manage time, to plan, to write things down, they become more independent, more successful, and they start to be able to follow what interests them. When you're a kid, you have to do what other people tell you a lot of the time. You may not like reading or English or history, but you have to take them in school and you have to do well at them. You have to pass. But when you're an adult, if you don't like those things and what you really like is math and science, then you can focus on that. You know, it's kind of the old story. If you're a kid and you don't, and this has happened to me actually, a child in my practice really did not like the feeling of sand between his toes at the beach. He was one of 4 kids, and everyone else loved the beach. And so every year there was a big drama before going to the beach, and he would wear his beach shoes and socks and sneakers. We tried everything. And finally, he went to college. And he realized that he never had to go to the beach again. That if they went on a beach vacation, he could stay at the house and he could stay at the yard. He didn't have to go to the beach. And he was able to figure that out because he went to college and he was by himself. And he realized, oh, I don't have to do some things that I really don't like doing. Like, I don't like brushing my hair. So I don't have to brush my hair every day. If it's really knotted and looks bad, I'll brush it maybe every other day, maybe after I take a shower, but I don't have to do it every single morning because my mom wanted me to. So that's sort of a simplistic example, but I think it shows you that kids with ADHD are idiosyncratic and fun and funny and goofy, and their brains work in ways that are unusual, and they have to grow into themselves. And they do, and they will. And one of the reasons I'm confident that they'll grow into themselves well is because they have you as parents, because you cared enough to come to this webinar. And I'm so grateful that you did. It's been a terrific pleasure getting to know you and working with you each week. You'll be receiving an evaluation for this course. I would really love it if you would fill it out honestly, so that I can do as good a job and even a better job in the future. Please stay connected with me. If you have questions as you go along, feel free to email me and I'll do my best to respond. Thank you so much for coming. It's been great to get to know you, and have a wonderful evening.